it was a really insightful moment for me, because I know people kind of talk about imposter syndrome, and there are all these people in the room with a whole different range of experience, and it was kind of that, yeah, okay, it's totally normal. Like, we as practitioners, as therapists, like, we're human too. Like, we all have these uncomfortable thoughts that come up for us. And imposter syndrome, I think, will probably stay with me forever, you know, in my career, and I think that's also normal. And I listened, I'm going to try and remember this now, so I actually listened to a podcast on the way yesterday that talked about self-doubt as a practitioner being helpful to you as long as it's accompanied by self-compassion, right? So I can have that inner critic or that self-doubt that helps me to maybe explore myself or my work or plan better, as long as I don't beat myself up for having a self-doubt or having a self-critic, as long as I'm self-compassionate and understand that I'm just human, and having these thoughts is okay. So that the podcast talked about actually that's better, the kind of self-doubt and self-compassion, than being a confident practitioner who might be kind of overconfident and not have that same exploration of self in practice. So I thought that's quite interesting. And then self-practice, right? So how much of the approaches or strategies that we use with clients do we actually use on ourselves? So I think I'm going to skip to the next slide quickly. So kind of managing your own stuff. So I'll say something silly, it's not good enough. You know, if I said to you all to think of the last challenging client session you had, or maybe it's a conversation with someone if you're not practicing yet, think about the kind of thoughts that might come up for you. You know, even within a session, are you kind of saying to yourself, oh my God, this isn't going well, or like they're totally not getting, you know, giving a workshop, they're totally not getting this. This is awful. You know, like that's normal. That's normal. So an ACT approach to this would be acknowledge and accept the thoughts and the physical feelings. So this is where ACT looks at unhelpful thoughts slightly differently to a kind of hard and fast CBT approach. So rather than disputing an unhelpful or a challenging thought, ACT talks about acknowledging that thought, accepting that it's come into your consciousness, but it can be there. You can still do what you want to do. You can still take a kind of value-led action. So one of the analogies that I thought was really good in some of the ACT stuff I've done was if you look at your hands as your thoughts. So if you think back now to a challenging thought you've had with a client or within a conversation, imagine your hands are that thought, right? So I'm not good enough, or this session is terrible. ACT talks about kind of fusing with a thought. So the thought in itself is not the problem. It's the fact that thoughts run away with you. So almost the analogy that the thought is here. I can't see anything else. I can't focus on anything else around that thought. I've kind of become fused, attached or hooked to that thought. They then talk about, in an ACT approach, imagine then trying to push that thought away. Right, so imagine trying to dispute it or to push it away. I don't like that thought, I don't want to have it, I'm therefore going to try and ignore it, or I'm going to try and argue with it, I'm going to try and dispute it and give myself, 10 reasons why I am a good practitioner, or why I can do this workshop well. So the metaphor here is that if I'm arguing with that thought, trying to dispute it, I'm giving that thought a lot of emphasis, I'm giving it a lot of attention. So I still can't focus on what's actually helpful to me. I'm also using a lot of mental resource to do that. So if my hands are here, okay, it doesn't hurt me at the moment, but in 5 minutes' time, if my hands are still here, I'm going to probably be getting a bit of armache. So this idea of, if I try and push thoughts away or I try and dispute them, actually that's not particularly helpful, because I'm putting all my mental resource there instead of thinking about what is helpful to me. So the metaphor here would be the kind of hands in a lap idea. So I can have this unhelpful thought come up, that's human, that's okay. But if I'm able to open up and broaden my focus, then that thought can still be there, but I can still focus on what is important to me now. I've kind of got that clearer perspective. So I think that's a really nice analogy. In terms of kind of an active approach and this idea of self-practice, what I found quite helpful, connect with the present moment and your body. So one strategy that an active approach would use, which is kind of like a mindfulness, a grounding approach, would be, they call it drop anchor. So essentially it's a grounding technique, so a body scan or focusing in with a part of your body. So it might be a deep breath, it might be pushing your feet into the floor. But it's this idea that just because I've had an unhelpful thought, it doesn't mean I'm not in control of my body, right? I can still breathe, I can still move, I'm still in control here, therefore I can still refocus, because I'm using that noticing part of myself to notice the thought, to notice how my body feels, to notice my environment, and therefore I can still commit to what I want to do. And then C for choose a value, use direction. And then T, take action, so engage with the task and commit to what is important to you. So, you know, if I relate that to public speaking anxiety, which I used to massively have, I might have a thought that, you know, I'll say something silly, it's not going to be good enough. I might also notice kind of physical feelings changing inside of me. Now, I can either let those thoughts hook me, and this is going to be terrible, and kind of go on that negative thought spiral tangent, or I can notice that thought, okay, that's come up for me, I kind of knew it would, that's the kind of thought I have. And I guess I can't go into this in too much detail, some of you may know more about it anyway, but it's called diffusion, essentially, so unhooking from an unhelpful thought. So they talk about kind of naming the thoughts or neutralising the thought. So just seeing it as words. It's words that have come into my consciousness, they don't have to rule or govern me. But I'm noticing this thought that this talk might go badly, I might say something silly, people might judge me. Okay, that's there, but can I take a deep breath? Can I feel my feet? Can I do a body scan? Can I ground myself? And can I still commit to what's important, which might be, you know, in terms of values, it might be sharing knowledge or learning or challenging myself. So I can accept that if those are the values that I want to live by, there's going to be some uncomfortable stuff that comes up for me. But actually I can manage that. Does that make sense how I put it? Yeah? Okay. I'll go back a step then. So, reflections on professional stress. I thought this was quite a good quote. Empathy is a double-edged sword. It is simultaneously your greatest asset and a real point of vulnerability. It's a kind of touch on that a bit earlier around, you know, as caring individuals, as psychologists, you know, we generally have decent levels of empathy or kind of learn about empathy and putting that into practice, and it can be really useful to us, clearly, you know, it's needed to build those that client rapport and kind of understand the client's world, but also it means that we get emotional stuff within our sessions. So like, I don't know if anyone's ever had like clients cry or tell you about a difficult situation and you almost feel like you want to cry with them, yeah? So like we get our own difficult thoughts and feelings because we have this empathetic strength, but it can also be a challenge that we have to manage. So just some examples I find within sessions, just like a little grounding exercise can be really useful to bring myself back in the present moment. You know, so it might be I suddenly, you know, want to be conscious of my feet pressing into the floor. You know, just something really simple that kind of brings me back into, I'm here. Reflection time after sessions. So kind of mindfully checking in. What's my client left me with? Like, how did I feel before this client came? How do I feel at the end? What does that mean? What does that mean about me or the client? And also what kind of difficult thoughts and feelings came up for me within this session, so kind of that self-exploration.
Can I ask you a practical question?
Yeah.
If you have 5 clients, let's say, how much gap do you leave in between for your reflection on admin?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. So I'd say 5 would be my absolute max in a day. It would normally be 3 or 4. But yeah, I'd normally try and leave an hour between clients, but if it was 5, it might be slightly less than that. And what I'm normally trying to do, and I'm trying to get into a routine of this, is kind of spend 10 minutes just kind of checking in with myself, almost like doing my own body scan and just kind of checking in with like, okay, how do I feel after seeing that client? And then depending on timings, I may or may not write up reflections or client notes straight away. I try to, but at least I've kind of had that check-in with myself, and I might write down like a thought or two to then come back to later. I have one more point on that. Oh yeah, like peer supervision support. I think we can all appreciate the benefits of that, and kind of having, through stage 2 supervision. I am involved in a kind of couple of peer supervision setups now that I'm chartered. I think that's kind of paramount to be able to talk through kind of self and cases confidentially. Any thoughts on that one? Kind of any reflections on professional stress and how you deal with, like, whether you can relate to any of those, or kind of any other ideas on how you manage professional stress?
So that was interesting about your work-life preferences. Because I work a lot of weekends, a lot of evenings. I still work in NHS, I do on calls. And I don't know if there's a right or wrong, but what I tend to do is I see something about you can't pour from an empty cup.
Yeah.
So I think a bit like a fuel tank. And I tend to drain the tank. I might go for a few weeks, 2, 3, 4, 6 weeks of really being very busy. I definitely need to refill it. I need a long holiday.
Yeah.
So I must do that as a strategy. Before my main summer holiday, I'll probably book in loads of stuff throughout June and July.
Yeah.
And that kind of makes me happy and unhappy.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's the right thing to do,
Yeah.
but you got to fit the self-care around the reality of working in sports.
Yeah.
So something I do is I just try to be mindful of how empty is my tank at the moment, and when am I going to refill it, if I'm going to do it for 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah, it's a really nice metaphor actually. Almost that kind of dial, like, yeah, I like that.
Trying to get to empty.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I suppose knowing the signs of when you are getting empty, like what are you like? Do you sort of, noticing, like, do I start snapping more, or am I, kind of ready to fall asleep right now? I'm so tired, and what are the signs for me?
On that note, it's quite good, I think, to have like early warning signs of stress and late warning signs.
Yeah.
So an early warning sign for me is I get irritable and snappy.
Yeah.
If I can't sleep, that's a real late sign. Things are really bad because I'm not listening well. It's just good to have like maybe a dial of different, what's the canary in the mine and what's the really late sign.
I like that. Yeah. I like that, thank you. Yeah, another learning point for me. Any other thoughts on professional stress? Anything else that kind of other people do that helps?
I think the peer supervision thing, like, being massive for me, like, being Ross, like, meet still regularly to talk through things, and then building these wide networks as well. So we've kind of got another supervision group we did earlier here, but then like the one that we set up with you guys as well, so you get perspective.
Yeah, definitely. I think kind of building communities, kind of try, like, even the Facebook group, like the Sports Psychs in Training group, I think, people kind of share stuff, and you can see like little pockets of kind of groups forming from that.
Because especially in private practice, it is quite an isolating profession. You're not necessarily interacting with work colleagues all the time.
Yeah.
And it's important to have someone that you can go talk to all of those.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. This is number 4. It says number 3, but this is the last one. So personal stress. Again, just kind of have a think about how well do I do these things. So having different ways to relieve stress or relax, having a tolerable level of physical pain or disability, having satisfying family relations, the ability to derive strength from personal values and or spiritual or religious practices and beliefs, belonging to supportive communities and being connected, able to cope with significant losses or betrayal, and time for reflective activities such as journaling, and then accessible sources of help. So those are kind of some elements of what we might look for. my reflections on those then. We kind of talked about this last time actually. Did we on the last slide? No, I suppose it was more the other way around, wasn't it? Like being empathetic with a client. So I think my point here was around, it's like my own stuff, like my own kind of life shit, for want of a better word. Like if I'm feeling emotional before a session, how do I manage those emotions so I can go in with this client and be in their space rather than mine? And what, it's worth reflecting on what kind of emotions do I struggle with, like as an individual, what do I struggle to kind of work with or process, and therefore if I'm feeling that, how do I manage it? So a little bit of insight into my personal life. I had quite an up and down period across stage 2. So my stage 2 technically was 3.5 years between October 2013 and then submitted last spring, and then kind of had 6 months wait for my Viva. And within that time, and I can smile about this now, I managed to get engaged, move house, get married and start a divorce process. So there were quite kind of big life factors that came up, some of which were obviously very positive and exciting, and some of which obviously weren't so positive and exciting. So something that I'm really pleased that I've done, and actually I suppose in 2 parts, personal therapy. I first went to see a counsellor simply because I was interested. I was looking at self-care and research on self-care. And I kind of thought I'd never been in therapy and I would like to experience being in a client's seat. So I kind of did it from a purely professional point of view and was very open in that and said that I don't have any particular life challenges at the moment, but I'm just really curious about being in a client's seat and working with a counsellor and kind of seeing what that's like. And we maybe had 10 sessions and I learnt some stuff about myself and kind of, what it was like to be in a client's seat. But it was a very different experience to then last summer, going, right, I'm getting divorced, I think I probably need some help on this from kind of an outside source from my inner circle. And it was a really different experience because I was in a more vulnerable place and I needed that support at the time. So it was like a need rather than a want or curiosity. And I think that's helped me not only personally but genuinely professionally as well. So some areas I can reflect on where that's really helped me is, like, first of all, emotional cognitive functioning. Like, am I functioning as a person? Come back to that kind of cup being full or that petrol tank. Like, if I'm not functioning, how can I expect to help my clients? Manage counter-transference dynamics, so kind of understanding like my stuff, me, how to manage that before I kind of get in my client's world in a session. And I guess some personal stuff, like understanding my preferences more. So to give an example, I realised through counselling that I really avoid confrontation and conflict. Like that's one of my, I suppose, like styles of being, preferences. And so it made me realise that there might be a kind of gap in my work or challenge in my work in terms of challenging clients sometimes. So I suppose it helped me just to recognise my preferences and how I might need to grow myself in practice, or to be things to be conscious of in practice. Being in the client's seat. So I was genuinely really nervous both times I went to meet both of the counsellors first time, and I was like, I kind of know what to expect. I kind of think I've got an idea of what this first session is going to be like, and I was still really nervous about it. And that's just one example of how it gave me a deeper empathy for what my clients might feel when they come and see me for the first time and feel apprehensive and they turn up, and particularly juniors kind of look like rabbit in headlights. Oh my God, what am I doing here and who's this strange lady? I suppose recognising the vulnerability that clients will feel at times, but also the relief of sharing things was a really interesting experience.
That ease up, is it just the first session you got then as well? Like once you built up the relationship with the practitioners, that ease, or was it every session?
Yeah, I would say it definitely eased, but actually now you said that, I suppose another of my reflections was that I have felt much more able to open up to my second counsellor than the first counsellor. So I probably felt more anxious, maybe not anxious with the first one, but somehow less able to share. And I think that comes down to personal rapport, which comes back to that relationships, like that grounding in. If we don't have rapport, understanding with that client, then they won't feel able to really deeply share. Yeah.
Do you also feel some of that difference then between the two was because of what was going on in your personal life? So
Potentially.
You potentially didn't have something.
Yeah, potentially. I'm trying to think if there. Yeah, I can't think that I did consciously hold back from the first counsellor, but I remember finding it more difficult to share things. Yeah, it may well be. It may well be. And also learning through observing skills, right? So how often do we get to see other practitioners actually do their work? So I kind of used it as well, not in like a necessarily conscious way, but I'm reflecting after sessions, like he or she, so my first counsellor was male, second one female, or kind of how did they handle that, or what kind of questions did they ask? So I found it really interesting, just like learning tips from them in that sense.
Do you reckon that made, because you just said the first one was a male, the second was a female, do you reckon that made a difference? You said you felt more rapport with the second person, so the fact it was maybe female, that...
I think that probably did make a difference. I think I naturally felt more comfortable talking with a female about some of the stuff I was talking about.
Have you found that with people that you've worked with when you're being a practitioner?
So we were talking about this yesterday, weren't we? In my private practice, I'd say the vast majority of people are female rather than male, particularly adults. I'd say juniors is maybe 50-50, but adults I work with more females. And I'm not sure whether that's a general demographic of people that come to sports psychology, or whether that's because I'm a female and maybe female adults are more drawn to me, and potentially some male adults may feel more able to open up to another male. I'm not sure. I don't know if there's research on that actually. There may well be on kind of gender preferences. I don't know, does anyone know of any research on that?
Don't have any research. I have male, female clients. I've been to male and female therapists too. I don't personally find the difference. I think it's more about in either seat. And I wonder if it's more about the issues that are being brought. You definitely want to find someone that's going to empathise with what you're saying and listen to you and relate to you. And I personally found no gender difference, but I think it might depend on the specific issue maybe, and the person obviously, and in fact both people.
And obviously it might depend on the sport as well. So some
Yeah.
In
sports...
terms of gender balance, yeah.
Yeah.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, interesting. Sure if there's anything else on that side. Oh, yeah, kind of like ACT processes, I guess, and personal stress on kind of like appreciation, self-compassion, those elements of it's not normal to be happy and positive all the time, like we're human beings. I suppose a key part of ACT, that might be different from some other approaches, is that we're not trying to get rid of a difficult thought or feeling. We're trying to accept it in pursuit of a value that we're working towards. So anxiety is okay. I was listening to a podcast yesterday where I was an ACT practitioner talking about, anxiety disorder comes about because the individual can't manage anxiety. Anxiety isn't the problem, it's the fact that that person's got anxious about getting anxious, or is kind of fused with the thoughts or feelings of anxiety and is unable to kind of unhook from them. Because anxiety in itself, as you know, is a very human emotion, thought or feeling. I don't know if anyone has got any reflections on that, or kind of insight into personal stress and any other ways of managing personal stress within practice. Doesn't need to be.
Alan, for you as a psychiatrist, is personal therapy, is that part of your ongoing CPD? Is it a requirement, or is that something that you choose?
Something that I sought, for different reasons. So it's not, if you're going to be a psychotherapist or a psychiatrist, psychotherapist, it is it's something that I wanted, that I needed to.
it's the same for us. It's not something that's required as our ongoing CPD, but I think it would be, like, you can see the benefits that it would have.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, because like you say, lots of other training pathways, it is required. Yeah, I definitely think it's worth looking into, even if it's a kind of curiosity of being in a client seat, as opposed to kind of, okay, I'm in kind of life shit here, I need to go and seek help. How are we doing for time?
We're actually at 1:30 already.
Are we?
Yeah.
Okay, right. What else do I have? Okay, yeah, no, there's only 3 more slides. Okay, so what I wish I'd known when I started out. I suppose these are just a few general reflections more than anything. Again, I'm not saying they are truths, but or like rules to follow, but they're just things that I guess I've reflected on and kind of learnt along the way. So relationships trump knowledge. I think that's one of my personal things, is that like I used to feel like I want to be more knowledgeable, I want to know more. Like if in a workshop people ask me questions and I don't know, well, it doesn't matter. Like if you've got a good enough relationship with someone, or you come across in a personable way in the workshop, then it doesn't matter. It's and I guess it's the kind of philosophical thing as well, from kind of humanistic counselling underpinnings, that the relationship kind of trumps everything, really. So it's better to know the patient who has the disease than it is to know the disease which the patient has. And I guess relating to that, looking at me and the client as working together, this idea of a team, rather than looking for sort of the right problem to solve or the right solution. And the literature talks about this, right? You kind of as early stage, there can be a tendency, and I certainly found myself in this place of, like this client's paying me and I've got to find a solution and I've got to help them. And actually, I guess the way I put it to clients now when we start up sessions is this is very much teamwork, Sometimes we're going to be talking and reflecting and processing, and you're going to come up with solutions yourself just through talking and maybe looking at things from a different perspective. Because maybe you're telling me things you haven't told someone before, or talking about it in a way that you haven't thought about before. And at other times, you might say to me, this is happening and I know why it's happening and I've no idea what to do with it. And that's where, I as the other team member will go, well look, here's the evidence base of some approaches that might be helpful, or here's my experience of working with other people in these kind of situations, and this kind of approach might be helpful. So it's very much this sort of two-way street. You cannot help everyone. I remember this really, I laugh about it, it was quite awful at the time. A junior cross-country runner, his mum had contacted me, this was quite early on in my training years, and I think he was 10 or thereabouts. So I arrived after school slot at their house, and this kid was literally having a meltdown in the car. He would not get out of his mum's car, so she'd just driven him back from school. She was literally trying to prise him out of the car, so she was trying to pull him out of the passenger seat, and he was sort of clinging on for dear life. And this was the kid that I was meant to be working with. So I was kind of like, they were sort of arguing each other for about 5-10 minutes. And then she turns around to me and she says, "Can you get him out?" I was like, I'm not sure I can use force or coercion here ethically. So it's a slightly silly example, but like you can't help everyone. That's taught me a massive practical lesson in always asking parents now, have you asked your child about sports psychology sessions? Are they interested? It's normal to feel apprehensive, but are they, sort of keen to at least try sports psychology sessions? And people have got to be in the right place to work with you and to want to change, right? So I've had a couple of cases where I've had a first session and people have completely dropped off the radar. And of course you want to explore that and reflect on that yourself. Like, is there anything I might have said or done in that session that kind of made a difference? But equally, you've also got to accept some of that's the client's stuff, and they may or may not be ready to work with you. So you can't help everyone. Know your values and practice self-care. I guess that's self-explanatory, but I suppose until I'd come across ACT and the way ACT talks about values and what's really truly important to you in life, I've never really considered that. Like, what actually is important to me, and therefore how can I practice self-care around that? Be yourself. I think when I first started out, there was a sense of I've got to be this professional person, I've got to go to these meetings and do the right thing and say the right thing. I think now more than ever I'm simply myself in sessions, and clients probably do get a good insight into me because I think I'm quite similar personally and professionally. And I do kind of bumble around in what I say a lot. I might start asking a question and then going, do you know what, I'm asking too much, or do you know, like, that's a bad question, let me start again. Whereas I think initially as a trainee I would have gone, oh, like, God, I can't make mistakes like that. And that's just a tiny mistake, right? As practitioners, we make mistakes all the time and kind of look back at a session and go, like, why did I do that or say that? But kind of like that idea of being authentic, be yourself. I think that it helps you to be relatable, right? The client can see that you're a human as well. You're not this perfect professional psychologist. You are also human with your own flaws and ways of being and style. My business is not my identity. So I think that goes to being self-employed. I think at times I get in danger of sort of intertwining my self-worth with my business in a way that, like, if business is going well, I'm kind of more buoyant, feel better in myself, and if it feels like things aren't going so well, kind of how does that influence me? I suppose this comes back to values and kind of looking at what is important in life and looking at kind of different life areas and work and health and relationships, and being able to kind of like separate work a bit from my whole identity. There are other parts of me that make up Joe, not just me, the psychologist who has a business. And yes, I want to be well respected, and there's things in my business I want to grow, and I want to, grow myself and my work, etc. But that is not all of me, and I think that's really important. These were just some practical things, like group work, pinpoint the take-home message, and leave time. So I remember my supervisor coming to watch one of my initial workshops, and what did he say? Okay, so I think I'd planned a workshop and sent it to my supervisor, and it was meant to be this hour workshop. This is one of the first workshops I ever did, and I'd literally tried to put every single skill that sports psychology has ever talked about within one workshop. And he was like, how are you expecting to get this all in and fit it in? Because I was like, I don't know how fast you talk, but you're going to have to sort of record it and like play it on speed. And like, what's the actual take-home message? What do people actually feel confident about taking home? So this was kind of a more practical thing, and I think was an insecurity of mine that, oh God, I'm not going to have enough to talk about, and people aren't going to ask questions, and so I'm going to like run out of things. And also, I don't want people to ask questions because I might not know the answer, so I'll just keep talking. And actually, more and more, I would say my group sessions are like workshops. They're so much more discursive than they used to be. Much clearer take-home message, and like, people talk. Or like, for those of you that have run workshops, people do talk, and sometimes you don't want them to talk, and you're going, let someone else talk, or how do I get you to stop talking? But yeah, that was kind of a key thing about workshops for me. In a team environment, know your boundaries ethically and personally. So ethically, things like kind of confidentiality in a team or a multidisciplinary environment. Personally, I suppose my reflection on one of the sports I've worked in was this kind of an all-male environment, and being the only female member of support staff in that environment. And my reflection was that at the beginning I almost didn't have enough boundaries on what was maybe appropriate to talk about, and because I wanted to build rapport with those staff members and be part of that team, it was kind of anything goes. Yeah, I'm happy to be kind of Joe the lad and chat about anything and everything, and lad bants, be part of the team. And I think as I got more confident within that role, what I realised was I'm not okay with some of the stuff that you're talking about. So we've gone away to a 3-day game and you're telling me about this, and I feel really uncomfortable that you're talking about that in front of me, and yet I haven't really been clear in my boundaries. So where do I now stand in saying to you, do you know what, you've talked about that for the last year and it's been fine, but actually now that's not fine. so kind of knowing your boundaries and balancing that with the rapport building, I think is important.
Can I ask, how did you manage a situation like that when you kind of, I can sort of sympathise in some cases where you just want to make that good impression, but then further down the line, how do you then, after a year, then highlight that?
I guess because I then knew those coaches pretty well, I was able to speak up and say, do you know, I think that conversation we had was out of sorts, and I did it within a group environment, and then I also kind of followed it up individually, just to kind of check in with what those people's perspective was of kind of how the conversation had gone and what I'd put across. But it was quite challenging, even then at the time. I was like, this is awkward, but actually, don't say that. Oh, and then context is so important. So it comes back to what you were saying about, do you go and watch athletes within their environment? And yes, I try to. It's not always possible, but massively important. And if I can't get in their environment, can I speak with coaches, parents, support staff within their environment, which can also be challenging in a one-to-one environment, in terms of kind of getting access and is the client comfortable with that and confidentiality, etc. But kind of getting an understanding of not just sitting in front of that client and talking, but also what's the environment, what's the world and the people that surround.
Can I ask a question on that? So, how many clients are like high level? And then
on a one-to-one basis?
Yeah, and then...
Oh, I'm trying to think. Most of my one-to-one clients would be amateurs, so there wouldn't be many professionals that I work with. There would be some. It's maybe like an 80-20 split, I would say. Yeah. And I work with a lot of juniors at the moment, so probably 40-50% of my clients are juniors.
Because obviously that makes it so much easier to say, I'm just going to ring a coach.
Yeah.
And the coach is in a development role.
Yes.
And whereas it's a professional thing, when you look at the culture of the sport, the athlete is very uncomfortable.
True. Because they've got to keep on the kind of good side of coach or
they don't want to
and
know that I'm talking to sports psychologists or work with sports psychologists.
Yes, true. Yeah, true.
To get the full picture and that contextual understanding is very difficult.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, it's interesting. Any kind of questions on that slide at all? Or?
Can I just ask a question because I need to go?
Yeah, go for it.
Sorry. Self-awareness, self-understanding, that when did you start developing that? And did anything trigger that? Obviously, like you said, all-nighters and stuff like that. Did you realise after that there is something you need to do about that?
So it's like self-awareness in general, like as me as a practitioner.
That self-care, that looking at yourself, not only I need to do this, that, I need to meet that deadline. But actually looking at you as a person, actually like I need to have time for myself and all the 4 steps you talk about, the relationships, the time off, the holiday.
Yes, good question. I think naturally stage 2 probably helps you because you have to do reflections, and I think conversations with my supervisor would have helped that self-awareness. So those would be 2 key sources, like I'm writing reflections and I'm noticing how I think and feel in that situation or how I felt afterwards. And my supervisor might be asking me about, workload, etc., that would help me look into self-awareness. But I almost think things like I recognise I need to rest, almost things like that came at a point where I had overstretched myself. And those experiences where I did that day where I ran workshops and back-to-back one-to-one sessions and came back and was exhausted and went, I shouldn't have done that. So I didn't have the self-awareness beforehand to go, that might be too much. It was only afterwards where I'd hit a wall and gone, that wasn't good for me. So probably a bit of both. Like there's some self-awareness, but I think sometimes to get the lesson learned, you kind of need to be in the dark place to have gone, okay, I won't do that again. Does that make sense?
So do you think that, you know, because obviously the stage 2 process is very like, so do you think it's a good thing that we actually have to go to the dark side and actually realise that, or?
I don't think it's a good thing. I don't think we talk enough about self-care early on. Like, you know, we talked about the gap between masters and stage 2 earlier, and I don't think there is that kind of input at master's level about being a practitioner and self-care. Like I don't think we get that training, which I think would help self-awareness. I think there should be more of that in our educational system, rather than having to kind of live it and find out about it.
I'd agree. It's like if you had a session like this as part of your masters, you'd have that more of that awareness, you know, and you probably still would to some extent need to go away and do it to understand that, but you'd have a bit more kind of
at least a bit of foresight into these kind of things might come up, and if they do, this is how I manage
You see, like, they are normal things.
Yeah.
But when you're in it, and you're by yourself, you guys are really great because you can talk to each other and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But when you're by yourself, you're like, I'm really struggling. I'm not good at this.
Is it just me?
Yeah, is it just me? Is it like?
Yeah.
So very interesting. Cool. So sorry. I need to
no, that's fine. Really good to see you. Thanks for coming.
Guys, thank you.
If anyone does need to slip off, then go for it, because I know we are going over but equally.
Yeah, sorry. Because when you said it was 1:30, I was thinking that was an hour in.
Yeah, no, it's cool. Like, I'm finding it really interesting you going on, but I know some people might have other stuff.
Please. But for some reason, when you said 1:30, I was thinking we started at 12:30, so I was like, I've got another half an hour, great.
I didn't mind, and then I was like, that's why people need to.
Right, that's
there's no queens in the room, so don't, unless you.
I'll be there. I don't know how long it'll be, so just put it in there. That's okay,
See you soon. The only other thing I was going to cover then was like more of kind of about my philosophy and just a little bit about ACT. So like, are people interested in that? And it will only take 5-10 minutes to talk about this part. So when I was asked about my philosophy in my Viva, and I obviously went into a lot more detail than this, but I would have said that I had kind of underpinnings of humanism within my approach, and I looked at kind of theoretical paradigms of a kind of humanistic approach and CBT, and sort of was trying to kind of mesh those together in terms of looking at the client as a whole and personal growth and fulfillment, and also kind of looking at mind, feelings, emotions, actions, and how those link together and strategies from a kind of cognitive behavioural approach. And I'd never really come across ACT until the beginning of this year, and it kind of came up in a peer supervision session. And I was like, oh, that sounds interesting, like it's something I want to look more into. And I'm more and more drawn to it as an approach, which I kind of think does link a humanistic and CBT approach together really nicely. For me, it's kind of got the best bits of both. So, this is what ACT would call the hexaflex, like the kind of 6 key elements of ACT. And I won't talk in loads of detail about each, but essentially, like the 3 elements they talk about are opening up, being present, and do what matters. So opening up in terms of accepting life is not about being positive, happy all the time. Like, we experience difficult thoughts, difficult emotions. That is part of our human experience. But can we open up to some of that stuff and notice it rather than getting hooked with it? So to give you an example from earlier, if I'm having a thought before a workshop that this is going to go terribly and I'm rubbish, do I let those thoughts carry away with me, or can I notice them simply as words and find a way to kind of neutralise those and refocus around myself in the present moment, which kind of leads to being present, contact with the present moment, and ACT is very much linked to mindfulness approaches. It kind of uses mindfulness strategies within it. Which I think really links to sport, right? So most sports people, if you ask them about their ideal performance state, they'll be here in the present moment. Like they won't be dwelling on something that happened, and they won't be 10 minutes ahead in the future looking at something they can't control. They're like in the here and now, and therefore able to make decisions in the here and now. And then do what matters. So knowing your values and what you want to commit to and why that's important to you, despite the fact that some difficult thoughts or feelings might come up as you're striving towards living those values. So they talk about psychological flexibility, so in the sense that these emotions or difficult thoughts or feelings come up, they're not the problem in itself, it's how I respond to those feelings. Can I experience some of that but still live the life that I want to lead? I may have done that an injustice speaking about it so briefly, but just as kind of a general idea. So these are some ways that I feel ACT has been a really positive influence on my work. I suppose a couple of light bulb moments. One was that this kind of question after I've been to workshop of was I actually setting behavioural goals with my clients? So often a client will sit down with you and they might say, I want to stop feeling so anxious. And ACT would go, as a practitioner, I can't help you do that. Right? Because anxiety is a normal part of human experience. What I can do is help you experience anxious thoughts or anxious feelings and allow them to have less impact on you. So kind of this idea of what kind of goals was I setting with clients? Was I setting a client a goal to feel more confident? Right? Well, I've definitely been guilty of that. We're coming up with our session goals. What do you want to be like? I want to feel more confident. Okay, that's our goal. Well, what does that actually mean in practice? So now I go more along the lines of, okay, if you felt more confident, what would be the actions that you'd be taking? Like what overtly would we see in terms of your communication or your body language or your actions? Like what would we actually see from you? You can still set covert behavioural goals, but it might be more kind of to do with I'm better able to refocus after an unhelpful thought, or I'm better able to engage in the present moment whilst I'm doing this particular skill, if that makes sense. So behavioural goals versus emotional goals. Establishing values early on, so I'd say that is a key thing now that I generally always do with clients, is explore values early on. So what is important to you, not only in sport but in life? Like, I suppose, and that links to these humanistic underpinnings, right? That I'm interested in you as a whole person, what's important to you, how do life and sport interlink? I talked a bit about this earlier, diffusion versus disputation. So the thought is not the problem, it's how I respond to the thought. So rather than trying to dispute the thought and putting loads of mental resource into that, how am I able to have this thought but be in the present moment? In ACT they use this really nice metaphor of a kind of thought radio that I can have, if you think of your thoughts as a radio playing, if we all sat here for 2 minutes, we'd all have a thought radio going on, we'd all have thoughts pop into our mind. This idea of I can't switch the radio off unless I take out part of my brain. I can't play, if you try and dispute it, you're essentially playing another radio in your head, but trying to play it louder. Therefore, I've got 2 noises now and I still can't focus on what I want to do. So, where was I going with that? I've gone off on one, haven't I, about this metaphor and the thought radio. But yeah, I suppose what I wanted to link that to was, like, in sport, we don't have time to dispute thoughts, right? So if I'm a horse rider and I'm cantering into a fence and my mind goes, that fence is flipping huge, or I don't think we're going to jump this, I don't have time to give myself 10 reasons why I'm a capable rider and I'm able to jump this fence and my horse is more than capable. Actually, what's more important is that, And this has maybe been over time that I'm able to do this, but I'm able to notice a thought, but that thought is not part of me, it's just words, and I can still be in the present moment, I can still commit to my values or my process goals of how to get over that fence.
On that point, I've actually worked with a client through sort of a mindfulness-based approach, and sort of a byproduct of it, really, it wasn't the main goal or the value that they came to the session with, but as a byproduct, they actually, as a, I suppose, a behavioural goal, was they struggled with fatigue, and through this process, they actually learned that they were okay with feeling fatigue, and they actually started to accept that emotion and that sort of the physical sensations that came along with that, and they actually started to accept that more, and now they came back to one of the sessions actually, I'm coping really well with fatigue. I know it's there and I have a good relationship with it now, and actually this is why I'm progressing now, and the thoughts that came along with that in the way that, you know, they accepted that everyone's going to have fatigue and other people might have it worse or better, but they knew more understanding about them. So that actually has actually worked for me, and that's as a sort of beginner in the process.
Yeah, it's really interesting, dealing with traumatic experiences. So I went for an ACT for trauma workshop. I was a bit like, I'm not quite sure what's going to come up here, because it was kind of more of a clinical based trauma. But actually, when you think about it, we work with athletes who have had really bad injuries. Like I might work with gymnasts or horse riders who have flashbacks to accidents. Like career-ending injuries, you know, or like career transitions can be part of our roles, which, in a way, like are traumatic for that individual you're working with. So I think ACT sits really nicely there in terms of looking at values and how can I still live my life in the way that I want to, but also looking at the self-compassion part of ACT. So things like contact in the present moment, kindness to myself, being able to diffuse difficult, unhelpful thoughts or feelings, some acceptance or validation that this is normal and human to be thinking or feeling like this, and connectedness with people around me and my values. And I also think ACT has some really great metaphors. So there's kind of so many, you know, like the thought radio is one of them. But I've had some real success with juniors in kind of using these metaphors that they really get, because you know that if you introduce that to a client, that's a pretty scary model. But there's some really nice metaphors in ACT, kind of around the thought radio. Like there's one, I'm probably going to explain it really badly now, but basically, if you imagine that kind of there's this like emotional monster, and I've done this with a junior where they kind of write all their unhelpful thoughts or feelings on labels and stick them to me, so like I'm the monster, kind of their emotional monster. And then if they stand kind of, if I'm here, they stand there, and there's this kind of pit in the middle, and you get a rope, and you kind of go, right, you know, struggle with me, you don't want these thoughts or feelings, so kind of like, you know, pull me into that hole. So imagine there's a hole between us, like the tug of war, like pull me into the hole. And kind of this idea that if you're pulling me, if you're struggling with me, as your kind of emotions as this monster, then your focus can't be elsewhere, your focus can't be on what's important, right, because you're just struggling with the thoughts and feelings. If you actually drop the rope, I'm still here, you know, your thoughts or your feelings are still present, but you're now able to focus on what is important, like the present moment, what I do now, what's important now. So just kind of little metaphors like that, where, you know, 15 minutes with a junior just talking can be quite intense for a junior client, but if you can get some kind of activities like that into a session, you know, literally a physical rope and kind of playing about with it, like they kind of get to grips with the concepts better. You know, I think that's true of anything with juniors anyway, isn't it? Keep the session practical. But I do think ACT is really good for some of the metaphors that they come up with. So I'm really sorry that I've completely gone over time, but thank you for bearing with me and staying. And that's kind of where I wanted to get to, but I'm really happy to kind of stay longer if people have got thoughts, questions, and want to stay longer. Then yeah, I'm easy.
Thanks, Jen. So, yeah, as Joe said, if anyone has got questions, then you can hold it now. Equally, if you want to head up or me to head up, do so. And we are also going to grab some food afterwards as well, if anyone wants to join us for lunch. Any immediate questions?
Just with regards to setting up your business then, what would you say is the sort of biggest challenge or challenges you faced with doing that, and how did you kind of deal with those?
So I'd say like a lot of the stuff up there, like the kind of fear of like actually getting out there and working, right? So like I've come out of this masters and I've got to go and start working with people. So yeah, I suppose that initial not only growing client base, but once I've got clients, so like I'm now nervous about going to that session. I remember one workshop quite early on. I ran a workshop for coaches, and for some reason I was absolutely terrified of doing it. I was like, oh, they're going to like think I'm a fraud, and I've never coached anyway, and like, you know, these people are all professionals and they're going to look at me like an idiot. And I remember sort of being so worried about it. I literally would have done anything for them to call me up at that moment before I left the house and go, you know, we've had to cancel it, there's not enough people signed up. So kind of that like feel the fear and do it anyway, and like those, you know, the self-practice strategies, because we know strategies to deal with this stuff, right? Like we work with clients on it all the time, but do we use it ourselves to manage our own anxiety or whatever emotional challenge it might be? So yeah, I think for me, like that initial fear of, I've got a client, I've got to go and work with them, but also if this doesn't go well, it reflects on my business. It's not like I'm employed by someone and, you know, I don't do a great job, but it's fine, like the employer will take the slack. This sense of, like, I am my own brand, and if I don't do a good job, then that's my name. I literally am Jo Davies Sports Psychology, completely original name, I know. But so there was kind of that pressure that I felt of being my brand and going and doing a good job. But I think like all that stuff I talked about, like, you know, normalising those emotions and being confident and valuing the knowledge you already have, etc. is really important.
Okay. And just sort of adding on to that as well, how was that? Is that something set up whilst you were doing your stage 2 training as well?
So,
what was that?
Yeah, I think over the summer of my masters I started running some workshops, and I kind of did some free of charge workshops over the summer to build my confidence. And then, yeah, I would have finished my masters, probably July, August time, and then kind of spent some time building a website and growing contacts, and started my stage 2 October. So within those couple of months, I kind of like got an online presence and started putting some feelers out for work. Yeah,
just the thought of that, I don't know, whilst doing it during my stage 2 training, I don't know why, I just feel like I wouldn't feel just not confident doing it, I don't really know.
Yeah, you know, come back to the imposter syndrome. Like,
I
you know, 5 years on, and I've been chartered since last October. I still feel it. Like I still come out of sessions and I'm like, oh, could have done that better, or run a workshop, and I'm like, I completely missed that point. That was really important, or you know. So I think it is really valuing that I do have competency already. It's just that I'm growing that, and look at, you know, that stretch model of stretch myself gradually. What do I feel most comfortable doing right now? So for me, it's like that equestrian stuff. I felt much more comfortable because I talked the language. I felt more competent already. Yeah,
thank you.
You're welcome. Anything else? Lunchtime then.
Yeah. So we're going to grab some lunch down and see if anybody wants to join to continue the conversations. Thank you again, Jo. It was a great
Sorry about the time. I can't believe you said 1:30 and I just merrily carried on, like thinking that's about half an hour.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, really good, thank you.
You're welcome. Cool. Yeah, okay, yeah.
Oh wow, that's 4.